members. Welcome to Overview and Scrutiny, Performance and Growth. Great to see you, and it's still light out, which is a nice change. Without further ado, we'll start the agenda. Apologies.
There are no apologies.
Okay, thank you. Minutes of last meeting.
So, councillors, you have in your pack the minutes from the meeting on the 5th of March. Are there any objections or amendments to make on that, or are you happy for the chair to sign? Councillor Blackwell?
Thank you. I'd just like to raise the abbreviation DFG. I have no idea what it stands for, and I know I missed the meeting, but equally I would expect it to be written in full at least first time.
Apologies, I thought we'd taken that out and corrected it into a fuller term of the abbreviation. So apologies for that. We'll make sure that gets corrected. We do try and keep an eye on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I couldn't see a reference, unless I've somehow missed it, to my question about what exactly. Actually, this was it's a part 2 item. Yes, but I haven't got any. There's nothing that I've received
I can
saying
follow
that we will have an answer
Chapman.
for the. Yeah.
Any other comments? Thank you. Members' interests.
Thank you, Chair. Need to register an interest on item 5 as the ward member for Sawtry. There are 2 funding applications. I've got no pecuniary interest, so I'll be remaining in the room. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So, same agenda item regarding the sale applications. So, St Neots Fire Station is within my ward, and I did write a letter of support for that application, so I won't speak to that particular item. It's also, there's Little Paxton's also in my ward, but that's a decision that's already been made, so just to register though. Thank you.
I just need to make with the same agenda item because I'm the county councillor for Kim Bolton.
Thank you, Chair. Item 5 again, ward member for Bury, and I wrote a letter of support. Again, I won't take part. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Item 5 again, I am the ward member for Great Gransden, but that's already been decided, as has been said.
Okay. Moving on. Item 3, Overview and Scrutiny Work Programme.
So again, in your packs you have the Overview and Scrutiny Work Programme and the notice of key decisions to be made over the coming months. Are there any comments and questions on anything within that item? Councillor Martin?
Not necessarily a question, but some potential topics to add on to the list. So the first one is one that I've mentioned on several occasions, but still hasn't made it onto the work programme, and that's a communication strategy. I had a conversation with Michael Hands 2 weeks ago to discuss it. He seemed, I won't put words into his mouth, but I think that's something that needs to come to this committee, considering it was one of the corporate peer review actions. And the second one is I'd like to see something come to us in regards to transformation, and in particular, a initial look at where we sit in the LGA's matrix of transformation scores. So for those that aren't aware, there's 10 capabilities, and of those 10 there are 5 levels. So it'd be useful to get an initial set out of where the organisation sits today, and then regular updates as we go along on where we've moved up or down as we progress through transformation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. On the communications, I seem to recall we raised this before. It was specifically, though, in terms of the local plan. Was it on the back of that you're talking about the comms?
Not quite, Chair. So within the corporate peer review, there was an item that requested that we update or we introduce a communication strategy, which I believe was circulated to Cabinet, but hasn't come through the democratic process. So I think it would be useful for us to have a look at that and to ask questions to Michael and his team.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Councillor Martin, I'm happy to pick both of those items up with you and we can look to refine the topic and the best way to present that to this meeting.
Very good suggestions, thank you. Are there any other comments? Okay. 4, outstanding responses to questions.
So in the pack again, you have the outcomes of some of the questions that have been asked at previous meetings. There are still a couple outstanding, a couple we have received, so will be circulated by email and noted in the next agenda. They just didn't make it in time for this agenda, but this item is just to note unless there are any questions on that.
Councillor Martin.
Not necessarily again a question, Chair, more of a comment. We have regular overview and scrutiny meetings once a month, and I would hope that the time that we have in between our meetings is a sufficient amount of time for answers to get to us for questions. So I know that we have a corporate director with us today, as well as the political leadership of the council. So I'm sure that they'll take note that I think it isn't, we should expect that those answers come to us in a timely fashion rather than having to be passed around after meetings in emails where they should be in the reports. There's a month to answer these questions, and if they can't be answered in that time frame, at least we can have a comment to say this is a reason why they haven't been able to be answered in the time frame given. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, I think we picked that up previously as well, but thank you. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, and to yourself, fully recognising the need for us to be providing efficient responses to members through this forum. I think it's just a consequence this time of when the reports needed to be published, relative to year end, etc., annual leave commitments, all those sorts of things. So hence on this occasion, there were a couple of points and it was brought up at the briefing that we had with the chair. So we'll make sure the answers get circulated as soon as possible, and we've got new processes in place for monitoring these moving forward as well.
Councillor Chapman.
Thank you. I have actually had a response to the second question, the one with my name regarding bins. And apparently where there's a road closure or not able to access, those missed bins aren't included in the performance figures, which somewhat clarifies the situation, but may mean that although we're showing a green on there, that it possibly should be amber. The other thing I am going to bring up at this stage is that I was very negligently away for one of the scrutiny meetings when a question which I previously asked, I understand there was a response to. I've looked at the papers and the response doesn't actually explain. The question was what's happened to the £1 million that was provided by the CPCA and being held by for the St Neots Master Plan and being held by the District Council, because at no time was any report made back to the partners in the Master Plan as to where that money had been spent or what was remaining. I believe the response to the question was just that it had been spent effectively, and there does need to be some detail, because although the District Council was holding the money was actually allocated to the Master Plan, which had other partners involved besides the District Council. So if we could have a slightly better answer, please.
Thank you for that. I know that we spent quite a bit of time actually on that answer. Mike, would you like to? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's not an answer I'm going to give you this evening, Councillor Chapman, in open forum. It was something that was covered under a Part 2 item. So either myself or the team and the Executive Councillor would be happy to pick it up. The point was, covered off in the exempt papers in terms of the council's position in respect to this matter. So I'm happy to pick it up offline.
It wasn't a Part 2 item. I think you're confusing the question with the question I asked last time, which was under Part 2, and a question which I asked, I believe, in the November meeting, which took several months for any reply to come through, and that reply came through at the meeting that I missed. But having looked at the reply, it doesn't give a breakdown of what that expenditure is. Whilst there was £1 million which was passed from the CPCA to HDC for a specific project, there was a master plan group which was responsible for proposing how that money should be spent. The last report, I believe, to the master plan group was that 260,000 had been spent on consultants, but the group was wound up without any account of where the other money was. And so I'd assumed it was with HDC still, and no breakdown of that money has been provided.
Thank you. I recall the conversation because we did have quite a detailed conversation on that. Mike, can I ask you to get back with the detail on that if that's acceptable? We'll make sure that's actually with you ASAP. Thank you. Okay. Item 5, Community Infrastructure Levy.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good evening. I think it's been a while since I last came to one of these to present something, so it's good to be back.
Lovely to see you.
And you, Chair, and all members. So I think members are familiar with the SIL process in general, aren't they? But obviously, I think last time we were here, there's been some changes. So what I'll do is I'll just introduce the item and then we can go to questions. So if I go straight to paragraph 2.5 and the SIL governance arrangements as approved by Cabinet in June 2024, we as Cabinet will consider funding for applications over £100,000. Any of those requests below 100,000 have been considered and approved in line with delegated authority, and they're detailed for information in Appendix 2. The total amount of funding will be considered for allocation in a financial year that's not to exceed £500,000. The determination of SIL requests as set out in this paper have been considered in accordance with the Council's interim governance procedures for SIL and ensure compliance with the fundamentals set out in legislation. And I'm personally very pleased with the quality of the reports, and I think you'd agree they're very well informed, very comprehensive, and delighted to say that we have several recommendations. If I go to the top of the report on page 36, and we are recommending here approval, if you go to item C, funding for the Bury Guardroom Community Hub. We are recommending declining the Kimbolton and Stoney community playgrounds. There's a recommendation to approve leisure improvements in Sawtree, SIL funding for that, and for the community fire station modernisation and extension project in St Neots. So that's just a brief summary. I don't know if the team want to add anything before we take questions and comments from members. Thank you.
I will open the floor to members. Councillor Chapman.
My question relates to improvements to path cycle routes at Riverside Park, St Neots. In the last meeting that we had, this was Yeah. I'll shout at you, Tom. Yes, so at the last scrutiny meeting, there was some discussion regarding the whether or not the money was any money was still available, or if it had just been spent on the paths at Regatta Meadow, and whether there was anything left. I believe that Mr. Soper said that all the money had been spent. Now there was 435,000 that was allocated in SIL quite some years ago, and this says 600,000. So there's a bit of a difference. I'm not sure where this how this comes from, and I'd like sort of an explanation of whether or not this 600,000 is the money that Mr. Soper was waiting for to complete the work on the cycle routes and paths in Riverside Park.
Can I just ask, who is Mr. Soper? Who is that?
Sloper. Neil
Oh,
Sloper.
Mr. Sloper, sorry.
Neil
I do
Sloper.
apologise, Neil, sorry.
No,
I thought you
it's-
said Mr. Soper. I'm sorry.
So, yeah.
Thank you. In terms of that project, we can answer. Thank you. In terms of the project is completed. In terms of 600,000, that's relating to the project cost for the whole scheme of works that was part of the application originally, and the 445 is what was the SIL ask towards that project. So the project's completed, but the 600,000 was the overall project cost at the time of application.
Chair, if I may. Yeah. So I'm a bit confused about this. Then, if the project's completed, I can appreciate the money may be spent, but the paths in Riverside Park are still, many of them are not fit for purpose, and are still as they were built in 1974. And it's it says 445,000 here, but the original SIL, I believe, was 435 because there was £10,000 of SIL allocated at the same time, which related to improvements to the Market Square at that time, rather than Park. So I think there's a slight difference if you look back at the SIL records.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the other 10,000, that was a separate SIL project and was accounted for separately. It's not shown here now because it's been completed for some time, so we don't keep them on this report after we've reported to members that it's completed. In terms of anything else, obviously within the actual park itself, I can't answer those. This is just about the actual SIL application, and that's a wider issue that would need to be discussed separately.
Mike, did you want to say something?
I was going to say that the project that is there, clearly, improvements to the path and cycle routes at Riverside Park will be a certain fixed project. It's not saying that every path and route through that park will be being improved or upgraded. It will have been a specific project with a set scope and a set project cost there. Happy to pick up Councillor Chapman directly in terms of the wider Riverside Parks issue. Equally, I'm sure the relevant portfolio holder will be happy to pick up that directly and bring it back through to officers for consideration in terms of whether there are wider improvements that are required to be made. So happy to pick that up separately.
Thank you for that, Mike. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I just need to declare another point of interest with regard to the St Neots fire station, as I'm a member of the Fire Authority. Thank you very much.
Councillor Martin.
Thank you very much, Chair. I have a point in regards to a couple of the applications and then one about the process. So I'll take the one about the applications first. I'm really pleased to see the application this time round be approved in regards to the Bury Watchtower. So all the work that's been done by officers to work with those teams is very much appreciated. I think the economic growth that will bring to the area and the economic development to Bury and the wider areas is good for the district. So a big thank you to officers and to the developer for keeping on top of that application. And of course, Jerry, you'd be surprised if I didn't mention Saltry Swimming Pool. Again, fantastic work by all involved, in particular the team for One Leisure on trying to get this one brought forward. And I concur with the remarks that the application was of very good quality from what we can see. The level of detail that was included in what members have received is quite substantial and very, very useful. So I'm sure what officers received was significantly more than this and of equal quality, if not greater. This is an opportunity within the district for us to get some swimming facilities built or reopened, and we will be bucking a national trend where swimming pools are shutting left, right and centre. This funding application is going to go a very long way to bucking that trend and hopefully getting something reopened in the area. Obviously, this is just the funding side. There's a lot of more work to do on this, but it's really, really positive news. So again, thank you very much to the SIL team, for the planning team for working through all of this. And also publicly a big thank you to the One Leisure team for all the work that they have done as well. It's going to be a fantastic thing for Huntingdonshire District.
Thank you, Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say I appreciate Councillor Martin's kind words here. I think this has been very much a team effort. And if you look at the report for Saltry, it also goes into the detail about, as you said, Councillor Martin, there's a deficit in swimming facilities in that part of the district, and that's just expanding on the point I made in my introductory remarks. I think Claire and Roe and the team really done some fine work here, and it's good that we're in a position where we can help to move projects along potentially if SIL funding is granted.
Councillor Catton.
There I am. I'm on now. Thank you, Chair. I noticed the point made about 500,000 for projects under 100,000, but I also noticed in this pack that we awarded none in this round. And it's really just a question of what can we do with the parishes to help them write better bids against this. I'm not saying there's anything, it's just, I know we've done work with them and we've tried to brief them and things, but it's kind of disappointing that none were approved this time.
Chair, if I may, I think the team do work closely with parish councils, and you remember Councillor Lowe asked me a question, and Council recently, and I had a meeting with Warboys Parish Council. We have a parish forum coming up, I think soon, and that might be an opportunity to work with our parishes again. I mean, we all go to our parish council meetings, and some of them they're not particularly big, are they? They have very small staff and they do work extremely hard. But it would be good if we could, as Councillor Catton said, have some successful bids. It's not. I don't think we're negligent in any way, either side, but I think we probably just need to develop the process a bit more.
I think you make a good point, because obviously this is a recurring issue that's coming up in terms of helping them develop a good enough bid. Clara, did you want to say something there? Oh, sorry.
So we have noted and we've looked at the trends of the applications for under 100,000, just to see what we can do to give more support this time. We did have some engagement, which we've noted in the pack, and we are building on some of the successes from that. So we did have the Town Parish Forum, we've got the newsletter, but we also had a drop-in session, which was the first one this time, and that was quite popular. So we're running 2 this time, and we're also launching an inquiry form so that those parishes that aren't quite sure if their project fits the need, they can get a bit more advice and guidance at an earlier stage, and that will be launched before the next funding round, So we have taken on board the feedback, and we have asked for feedback from towns and parishes, and we are trying to address that a bit more and run out with a bit more engagement this time.
Thank you. Councillor Pitt.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll start just picking up on the point that's just been discussed following Councillor Catman's question. So I was really pleased to see the sections 5.9 to 5.15 at the end of the report talking about kind of lessons learned from this round. It was really great to see, and I think I largely agree with all the points made, and really encouraged to see the inquiry application, which I think is the same point you just made. I think because you can see from some of the larger applications, there's months and huge number of hours of work that have gone in, to some of them to actually get planning permissions. And that's a big bar, a high bar for applicants to go to if they're only just want to understand if this is likely to progress. So I really welcome that proposal. I also think it's really positive. These reports are much, in my time on this council, these reports have become much more detailed, which is great. And, you can see that it's sort of inner workings of the decision-making process. At the downside, perhaps, for this meeting is it gives more things for me to look at and sort of to comment on. So yeah, really delighted in paragraph 2.7, so that I'll just read the sentence out. It's important to be able to demonstrate how a decision has been reached with clear reasons in order to uphold the integrity of the process. And I think that's true by and large. I think Appendix 2 for the decisions under 100,000, there's very little detail on those, and I appreciate Cabinet isn't being asked to make a decision, but I think for the applicants it would be really helpful, because it's kind of value judgment saying, this is deemed to be doesn't fit with whichever policy, whatever it might be. But I think for the applicants and future applicants, it would be really helpful to understand a bit more detail behind it. Shall I pause there?
I was just going to say we do give full feedback when we go back to the applicants. So whatever the guided that decision and whatever comments were made in that meeting, we do give them full feedback.
Great, that's really good to hear. Thank you. And I guess, perhaps for other, for us as members and just for other potential applicants to see a little bit more detail, happy to leave that with you. I've got sort of a few thoughts around the scoring system. So I think it's really great because there's so much to consider in this process to actually have a proper scoring system behind it. And I think the report is a bit tantalising because some of that scoring system is laid out really carefully and clearly. So the statement of intent's got 7 clauses and there's 2 points awarded to each, which is great, and I can follow the logic of all of that. It kind of begs the question, what's behind the other 30-odd points, which I'd love to be able to see that, and not least because Cabinet's being asked to make a decision, and obviously if Cabinet comes to a different decision, but it doesn't know the thought process that's guided that decision, it becomes quite difficult. And for us as members of ONS, if we were to advise a different outcome, I kind of feel like we don't quite have the information in front of us. Just on some of the specifics, so Berry has got.
Can I just
Yep.
pause you there, because obviously you've raised an issue on the scoring mechanism, and I think it's probably quite useful for Clara or one of the team to answer that specific question before we move on to other issues.
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of the scoring mechanism, yes, we are very aware that, and we've stated in the report, it is an indicative scoring mechanism. So it's not a black and white. It's there to help guide and make sure that the decisions that we're taking, or the recommendations we're taking, they are actually following what would seem consistent and fair. So we have done that. We've deliberately not put anything out in terms of the full scoring, because obviously it isn't a formal approach and it's the first time of us looking into this. If it becomes something of that nature, then obviously we can do, because it was the first time. We obviously haven't for this occasion, but it has helped us to look at and see where we think therefore things are right, where it's made us question anything more, and we've looked back at past ones to see how that scoring has worked. So it's not just looked at blindly to this round. We've compared against other rounds as well to try to see if this works in a sensible way as an indication. But it is the first one, and it's definitely been looked at from an indicative point of view.
Can we assume then, obviously this will be iterative, and the comments that Councillor Pitt has made in terms of either making it visible or much more clarity in terms of the scoring mechanism? Clara.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, and just to build on what Claire and Ro have presented this evening, yes, it is iterative, and we continue to work positively with our portfolio holder and as schemes come back through scrutiny. But I think just one point I'd like to make is that obviously in the first instance, these are technical assessments. undertaken by officers. The intention is not that either Scrutiny or Cabinet would do the role of an officer. So I think moving forward, we would be transparent with the scoring process, but I think, again, it's just being mindful that officers have come at it from a technical perspective and will be presenting professional recommendations. And while you might like to scrutinise how we arrive at a recommendation, I think it's just to be clear that we wouldn't be asking either the panel or the Cabinet to be making those technical assessments to arrive at a different conclusion. Thank you.
Did you want to come back on that?
Yes, please. So I think, I recognise both of those answers and totally addresses the points I've made. I think in terms of perhaps, sort of constructive criticism in terms of this is a work in progress, just picking up on some of the points. So for Berry, so there seem to be 7 statements in the statement of intent, but Berry gets yeses for all 7, but only gets 12 points for that. So maybe they deserve another couple of points. It doesn't change the outcome. So just picking up on that, there's a mention of a score of 40 on one page for Sawtry and then 41 on another page, which kind of made me, a few wobbles there for me personally. And then just in terms of there's a list of criteria. The statement of intent is really clearly laid out, but there's on paragraph 5.7, there's a list of 9 points that are part of the technical assessment, but they don't include some of the things I would expect to see there, such as value for money, community support, and I'm just unclear whether that's just a non-exhaustive list or whether those things have been included. And obviously the fact there's a score behind it shows there's a very clearly defined process. Another example, just to pick up on, there's a point about...
Can I just allow
Okay, thank you.
officers to answer that, Councillor Sanderson?
Well, thank you. I think that's very useful feedback from Councillor Pitt, and probably goes more to the governance than the outcome here tonight, but it's certainly something I think we need to take on board at some stage. At a next cabinet meeting. Yeah, happy to do that.
Clara.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Councillor Pitt, you offer some very helpful recommendations, and I think the appropriate mechanism would perhaps be for us to take offline, and we can go through those in a more detailed fashion. And happy to arrange a meeting with you to go through those at any time. Thank you.
I think that's really helpful. Are there any other? Fine. Councillor Martin.
Thank you very much, Chair. So just looking for a reflection from both Councillor Sanderson as the portfolio holder and from officers. So this is the first iteration of this new governance process. Obviously, it's only an interim governance arrangement at the moment. So it'd be useful just to get a bit of what do you think went well? What do you think could be improved? Do you see any improvements or changes that are likely to be needed down the track? Just, I think it'd be useful for us to understand, both from a political point of view and from an officer point of view, where we sit.
Well, Chair, I think Councillor Catmull highlighted the up to 100,000. None of them were recommended for approval. That I think is a shame. That's some more development there. That working more closely with our town and parish councils. I think overall it's gone well. I think, as I said, the quality of the reports has been excellent. I'm pleased we're now in a position to approve some of those bigger ticket items, if you like. I'd anticipate we perhaps doing another SIL round this calendar year. Not sure exactly when, and in 2025, but I think we'd look towards doing that. And I'm happy to work with colleagues and reflect on comments to see how we can fine-tune the process.
Thank you for that. Building on the... sorry.
Sorry, Chair, I asked for both a political and an officer's reflection on the process, please.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of it, it's definitely for us been, some positives and some that have not been so positive. We've all talked about already those that are under £100,000 request, and that's definitely where we want to have some more focus about education on that side. We've already been talking about actually how we're going to be looking at presentations through the Town and Parish Forum that Councillor Sanderson has already referenced. And also some of the elements of how we can make this a better process in terms of how we can be there to support parishes where they reach out, obviously, to us. So we do a lot of communication with our town and parishes when we're having a funding round, and we're trying to encourage more of that coming back. So Ro has already mentioned with regards to the inquiry form that we're already looking to set in place so that we can have that conversation more to try and have that discussion about actually, is this the right place? And if we know that it's not, is there somewhere else we can direct those people to still help them, but still isn't maybe the particular ask they should be going to? Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. One of my takeaways from last year's Town and Parish Forum was certainly on the feedback forums. The session that presented most value to towns and parishes was the SIL engagement. It really did energise towns and parishes, which is why we've then lent into doing more work with them. But I think we're at a point too where we just need to understand what their capacity is and how we can enable parishes to work collaboratively and share ideas between themselves as well on success stories and feedback from going through the SIL process. And I think as we go into the Town and Parish Forum this year as well, I think that needs to be some of the questions we need to ask. Dare I say, you as ward councillors as well, we'd welcome feedback from you. What is the feedback from your parishes? How can we support you, not only promoting SIL, but promoting that collaborative working in the community? But, you know, in my role, hearing that feedback of what towns and parishes got most value out from last year was fantastic. We're starting to see it move through some of the bigger bids now, and I think there's still that piece of work that we'd like to understand more of. How can we bring more successes forward in the smaller tranche of SIL bids? And I think that's going to be iterative. I think we're going to need feedback from you as ward members as well as parishes as we continue to develop the process. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Without labouring the point, in terms of the bigger items that are before us, actually the governance is working really well in my view. Standing back and looking at it, actually it's saying that there is the role of the SIL fund is effectively to supplement other funds that are available to deliver wide-reaching opportunities. And when we talk about our place strategy and the vision that we've got of improving places on a number of different facets, the bids that are being allocated funding here to propose to go to Cabinet will achieve that. They're not just hitting one particular objective. They are supporting growth that's either happened or will be happening, and that SIL isn't the only driver for this. When we look at the under £100,000, it is a really tricky area because I can understand from a town and parish perspective, they're thinking this is money that's potentially available to do things on a local level. But as we say, the construct of SIL itself, which has got to be linked to growth, and some of the bids were still struggling around either that link to growth, either accepting growth that will be coming down the track or having accepted previous growth. And equally, the bit about using the funding to deliver improvements, not just maintenance and things that can be covered through other means. So it's about, it's an educational journey. We don't expect town and parish is to, be fully conversant in the legislation and the guidance that's out there. Who knows what SIL may look like in the future? But what we've got now is a system that I think compared to where we were 6 months to a year ago, actually we've got a much clearer system and we'll be able to feed that back. And we've got some bids before you, big chunky items that will deliver benefits. So bringing it back to what SIL is doing in terms of delivering our wider place strategy objectives, absolutely, it's in a much better place.
Councillor Cat.
Thank you very much, Chair. I mean, I do notice on the smaller ones, we have 3 that all scored 28. Wonder what they would have had to do to get over the threshold. That's what they're probably, well, I declare my interest. I wrote the first one, so what did I miss out? Because I wrote it for my parish council since I'm a member of the parish council.
Councillor Pitt.
Thank you, Chair. It's a really interesting debate, and I'm happy to feedback some of the other comments I've got outside of the meeting. I think just as a more general point, there's a few references to projects being local rather than strategic. And for me, the word strategic means whatever anyone wants it to mean when they say it. And actually, if local is the opposite of strategic, then there's not going to be many. Most projects under 100,000 probably won't have a district-wide impact. They probably will be, the beneficiaries will be living more locally. And so I think it would be really helpful to have some clarity from the administration about actually whether if something only has an impact on people living within the parish boundary, that just doesn't cut the mustard. I think having clarity on that and what that might mean in practice, not necessarily today, but that would be really helpful for the next round.
I think actually you make some good points, and I think Councillor Martin, specifically in his question, was saying, what were the lessons learned, because this is a new process, and of course we're just going to learn and actually get better, and hopefully we'll be able to help parishes and towns develop and actually get these SIL applications through. Are there any other questions? Well, I've actually got one of my own actually on this issue. With the SIL process and looming LGR, what's the risk management looking like in terms of SIL?
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, LGR, devolution, they're hot topics at the moment, but I think certainly in the planning sphere, it is business as usual until formal changes come into play. So for where we are now and how we're proceeding, it's business as usual. We're focusing on our SIL, our communities, and as and when further legislation comes out or more information is known as LGR, we will then reflect on impacts at that point.
Thank you, Clara. Any other comments? Okay, if there's nothing else on SIL, we'll move. Oh, Councillor Chapman.
Thank you. I think your question regarding the risk of SIL and LGR is very important, because I believe many of the partners that we have do not have the level of development, or potential partners that we have do not have the level of development that we have in Huntingdonshire. And I'm a little bit concerned that if we do business as usual and don't plan for how we retain that money for Huntingdonshire to alleviate the problems that are created by development in Huntingdonshire, that we may find that it goes to other areas of the county post LGR, and I believe that we should be have a plan for that risk now. So thank you for bringing it up.
Mike.
Through yourself, Chair, if it gives you any comfort, Councillor Chapman, it's been one of a number of different topics that we've already kind of started thinking about as officers, and indeed having initial conversations with Cabinet regarding the potential impacts on SIL as well as other wide-ranging things across the authority. As Clara says, at this moment in time, we have to continue as we are. We've got the legislation that is there in respect of SIL, and indeed there's a programme of planning reform going on, which we're expecting a new infrastructure bill anytime soon, which again may have implications for what an infrastructure levy in general terms may look like in the future. We just don't know. So again, in terms of being able to offer some comfort, yes, we are aware it's a risk. It's an issue that we're looking at, and we're aware of it and cognizant of it. We just don't have any further direction of travel at this moment in time. So, as Clara says, it's very much business as usual.
Thank you for that, Mike. If there are no other questions on SIL, we'll move on to the land availability assessment. Now, you should have had some emails in terms of this particular item. I'm hoping that this is just a formality, because obviously it's just these are addendums to the previous documentation. But are there any comments on this item? Councillor Martin.
Thank you very much, Chair. Not a comment. I completely recognise what we're here to discuss this evening. A concern that's been raised to me from parish councils and from parishioners is that all of these are being decided differently because we're in tilted balance. Can I just get the confirmation from officers that that isn't the case, and that these are being assessed in the same way that they were assessed the first time, and that tilted balance has no impact on this whole process?
Thank you, Councillor Martin. I think a very helpful question, and through you, Chair, the tilted balance is only engaged for the purpose of decision making and not for the purposes of preparing the local plan. So the methodology for considering these additional sites before you is consistent with that presented previously, and the tilted balance does not have any bearing on the local plan process. Thank you.
Thank you. If there, sorry, Councillor Chapman.
Oh, I thought didn't get in first there. I'm aware that my parish council has submitted a number of applications in response to this document, suggesting that we, as part of the process, designate green open spaces, not just building sites. And this is something which comes quite clearly through from the MPPF and the Localism Act and various other directives that in order to build a balanced community, we should seek proposals for both green open space and as well as sites for land assessment. And so anyway, my local council has put in a number of items. One of which is probably the most important floodplain in the area most highly likely to flood, and doesn't stand any chance of ever being developed. But it would be appropriate, I believe, for it to be included in the within the land availability assessment, and I don't believe it is as such at the moment.
Thank you, Chair. This is a question Councillor Chapman rightly asked me at Council last week, and I think I responded then by saying probably more appropriate for the neighbourhood plan for St Neots, and I think St Neots was the first parish to actually complete one of those. I know that's quite a long process, isn't it? And you've got concerns that may take a long time. What I will do is ask Claire if she can just clarify the point here. Thank you.
Certainly, as you say quite rightly, Councillor Chapman, St Neots Town Council did submit 27 additional sites with the green requests to us to look at them for green space. A number of these repeated sites which you brought to us in 2019 when I went down to have a meeting with the Town Council about sites and advised them then on how they might update the neighbourhood plan, which was the question put to us at the time. And then there was a further series of exchanges in September 2021 with St Neots Town Council again asking initially for 3, then 7, and then in excess of 20 sites to be considered then, but again seeking advice on how they might do this through the neighbourhood plan. And to be quite honest, I very strongly feel that the neighbourhood plan is the right vehicle for looking at these sites, because that is where you can best get that local community engagement on what is the purpose of the green space designation, whether it should be a formal local green space, which has a series of tests set out in the MPPF as to the standards it needs to meet, or whether it should be some other form of open green space designation through the neighbourhood plan, depending on the scale of importance of that green space to the local community. And they are the ones best placed to actually provide that input. We have on both occasions provided advice on how to update the neighbourhood plan and what processes are involved. And I'm more than happy to have a further conversation with St Neots Town Council to advise how to go through that process again. I do understand there are concerns over the timing, because obviously that neighbourhood plan was compiled under the core strategy rather than the current local plan. So there would be the need to update some wider elements of it as well. So the initial question of could it just be done as a minor amendment has been advised that that would not be possible. So they would need to prepare a draft plan and put it out for consultation, and then after that we would take the processes forward to take it through the examination, and if recommended by the examiner, a referendum.
Thank you, Claire.
Chair, if I for clarification, back in 20, I believe Councillor Gardner was also involved in this at the time, 2015, 16, whatever, when we drew up the neighbourhood plan at St Neots, the local plan at that time was what was termed emerging, and therefore all of the sites, and many of them, you rightly say, were raised and have been previously raised, were raised at that time, and we were told that they couldn't go in the neighbourhood plan because it was something which would be the duty of the local plan to identify. And then they didn't appear in the local plan. So I appreciate that they could be applied for in the with a neighbourhood plan, but the neighbourhood plan does actually have a few more years to run. The town council is doing a revision, but their initial meeting with consultants was that for a town the size of St Neots, it would take up to 3 years to complete that process. Now, the land that, or the parcel of land to which I referred a few moments ago is just around 50 acres of land. It lays 5 times last year under more than a metre of water for 5 days at a time. It's the most important floodplain that in the town to prevent flooding of St Neots town centre. It's getting worse each year, and I believe if this council has any commitment to addressing climate change or conservation, then this is something that should be included, and the district council has powers to do this. The district council is also the flood resilience authority for the area, and this is there are 400 homes in Old Amesbury and Eden Soken, and the town centre, in fact, in the Priory Ward, which are at high risk of flooding because there's a higher risk of flooding, or if there was any sort of development on this land. And other bodies have supported a proposal to improve the flood drainage on that land. The district council isn't being asked to put in sill money or anything else. It's being asked to do something which addresses climate change and the environmental aims of this council. And I can see no reason why that should be delayed for 3 years whilst water levels continue to rise.
Thank you. Can we take this offline, or can you answer? I mean, obviously these are observations. I accept that. Claire.
I mean, certainly in terms of the land at particular flood risk, there are other mechanisms, and including through the local plan where we might address that. The concern was simply that a local green space was not the best mechanism for doing so. But we will be looking at strategic green infrastructure, and certainly the whole of that Ouse Valley corridor and the land through the central of St Neots would be expected to be forming part of that. So it will be protected, but just through a different mechanism.
Thank you, Claire. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. At the last consultation, various of my villages, and I think across the district, were having problems submitting their views on various sites. What have we done to improve the way parishes can submit their views on various sites going forward? Because I think you're aware that there were problems before, so what are we doing now to improve the situation going forward? Thank you, Chair.
Hi, thank you. We have prepared a common strategy for this consultation. There is much less material to view in the first place. It will be much more manageable in terms of what's available to view. But we have listened to the feedback we received during the previous consultation and have, where possible, made amendments to our approach this time. So we're working with the comms team to improve the sort of signposting of FAQs and where to get help, and make the our objective consultation more streamlined where possible. We are focusing our media on social media, sort of using the council social media, Let's Talk Huntingdonshire, and all to signpost that messaging as well. We will also have emails, postal options as well available if online methods are a struggle still.
Thank you. Claire, Mike?
Thank you, Chair. Just again to pick up further to Councillor Gardner's comment, I know it's a point that you've raised on a couple of times to this scrutiny committee, and I've given you our assurance that we're looking to bring forward a presentation on the feedback from the consultation exercise once the team have finished going through that, and obviously the lessons learned. There's a fine balance with this about, as kind of explained in my communication email, to say this is before you for consistency. And we want to make sure we're consistent with what was done before so that somebody can't come out the woodwork later and then say, well, you did this different this time compared to last time, because that is a grounds for challenge as we go into the later parts of the plan, and we don't want to come unstuck on that. So we're trying to, where we can, make minor tweaks to improve the process, but I can give you the assurance again that the team are working in the background to bring forward that wider kind of lessons learned exercise about the consultation, so that as we go into future rounds of consultation, we can make big sweeping changes if we need to at that stage.
Clara?
Sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Gardner. To your substantive question about the challenges that some people had, obviously you've heard that we're going to have a detailed comms plan. We've listened and we've learned, but we did acknowledge at the time that there were certain pinch points, and I think we surprised ourselves with the volume of responses we actually got. In the region of, if not in excess of, 7,000 responses came back in. It's the highest we've ever had, and was actually the highest amongst our neighbouring authorities. And what it showed us was actually going through the Let's Talk Huntingdonshire page, at one point the traffic was actually very high. So it was a nice surprise for us that so many people wanted to comment, but clearly it's shown us this time to be more prepared. And again, as we move into future consultations, hoping that that number increases, we'll be working with the comms team and IT to make sure that all channels and mechanisms are available. And of course, you as councillors, if your parishes raise any issues with us, please do feel free to get in touch with us directly. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Will there be, so if a parish is trying to submit and they do have a problem, will there be someone or an email address that they could contact to try and sort the issue out? And if that could be, just let the various parishes know where they can call if they have got an issue trying to submit a response. That's really, if they can have that, I think that would be very beneficial going forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Catmore?
Thank you, Chair. I would like to have some further clarification on the answer that I received a few moments ago, because if there are other ways of protecting this land, will it be done within the local plan? The reason this needs to be in there is because whilst even 3B floodplain exists, it is regarded as having hope value by developers. And whilst that hope value exists, which it will continue to do unless there is something in the local plan that says this cannot be developed, then there is a further chance of it being of those pieces of land being put forward in the call for sites now or sometime in the future. So please, can I have an assurance that these other means will be reflected within the local plan and provide a protection for those pieces of land, even if it's not as green open space?
Claire?
Yes, I'm happy to do that. Obviously, we would start with the NPPF itself, which directs us to do concentrate development in flood zone 1 as far as we can, and it most certainly tells us that flood zone 3 is only appropriate for basically water-related development anyway. So we can use mechanisms such as strategic green infrastructure. We are liaising with the lead local flood authority and the Environment Agency through both our strategic flood risk assessment and our water cycle study to assess what we would need to do and how we might be able to make this work. But certainly we can look at that land through the local plan.
I think that was a no. No, Chairman, I don't think it's a no. I'm happy to take this further. I'd happily discuss with Councillor Chapman something he's highlighted, and I think right to do so. And happy to take this offline as well. And obviously a while before the next cabinet meeting, so we've got time to do that.
Thank you. Councillor Cap.
Thank you very much, Chair. It was just really this whole communication thing I have of my parishes. 2 have just got more sites, so they know how to do it. But I've got 1 parish who had no sites in the last round, so we just need to help them because this is going to be completely new to them.
Councillor Pitt.
Thank you, Chair. This possibly has already been covered, but just for clarity, so I think the last time the Call for Sites paper came to this committee, obviously there's a lot to read, but actually I think the thing that this committee or ward or members of the council, if they know about anything, they know about communicating with members of the public. I think that's our one specialist subject. And so it's great to hear there's a comms plan. I think engagement strategy was mentioned as well. I think if that could come to this committee, I think we could provide some real value to it. I think that's already been offered, but if we could just have that confirmation.
I think that's been confirmed. Yes, it has. I'm keen to move on to next item, item 7, planning enforcement.
Chris?
Welcome,
Chair,
Alison.
I wondered what that device was for, but Ali's kindly clarified now that it's for her enforcement presentation. So just before we start, I know from my own experience, we get a lot of casework, don't we, about enforcement issues, and regularly people go, they're not supposed to do that. That's against what they were given permission for. And of course, in planning enforcement is a lot more complicated. And there are times when you just need to be very careful in how much pressure you put when you sort of ramp things up, take the legal steps. And I think Ali and the team do that really well. You probably heard me being asked a number of times about what our planning stats are as a local authority. And I think enforcement is one of those where we're getting through the caseload and getting it down to more than a manageable level. And they've done some sterling work on that, and a lot of cases have been solved and progressed. But I'll hand over to Ali. Thank you.
Thank you and good evening, members. Tonight I'll be presenting some information on the planning enforcement team and the journey that we've taken over the last 5 years in line with some wider planning service improvements. So this is the team at Huntingdonshire District Council. I lead the team and joined the authority in September 2019. I've been in the planning arena for over 20 years, with 16 of those spent specifically within planning enforcement. I'm a qualified town planner, and I also hold a qualification certified by Cambridge University in planning enforcement. Sally's been in post as our planning enforcement officer since July 21, and previous to that was acting up from an administration supports post within the wider team. Z joined us as a planning enforcement officer in June 22, and Lauren joined us in March 23 and is our senior planning enforcement officer. You'll note from the chart that we're also hoping to recruit an apprentice to bring us to full complement. All of the team are making great strides with their training and are building on our knowledge and experience with each case that we deal with. The definition on the screen details with the primary legislation that we work with and defines what a breach of planning control is. We also cover works to listed buildings, works in conservation areas, demolition, protected trees and hedgerows, advertisements and fly posting within our field, all of which generate quite a large number of complaints. I will look to expand on these areas later within my presentation. For now, however, I would like to take you through what a breach of planning control is and what this means in practice. The team receives around 350 cases approximately a year, and we currently have around, well, actually 365 as of this evening, cases on hand. Time is of the essence, and it's therefore really important that we gather as much information as possible from our reporters, which can include district councillors, local parish councillors, other teams within Huntingdonshire District Council, and local residents. The more information that we can start with, the quicker our assessments can be. Photographs, owner information, specifics of a potential breach, details of a planning permission that is not being complied with, can all help us as an enforcement team to save time. Once we have sufficient information, we can prioritise the case in respect of possible planning harm, register an investigation, and start the ball rolling. A site visit will usually be made where appropriate, and this is not always announced. An initial assessment will be made and would be reported back to all relevant parties, explaining our proposed next steps. We will also collaborate with other departments and agencies if there are elements of the report that fall outside of the control of the planning legislation. If there is no breach, we will close our case, update our reporters and other stakeholders. As it says on this slide, if planning permission is likely to be granted for the reported matter, or it is not considered expedient to pursue, we may not take the matter further, but will move on to address other issues that may be causing worse planning harm. Whilst we are titled as an enforcement team, I describe our main role as solution finders. We will always look to help our customers to resolve issues through various routes, and part of our job is to find the best route forward and provide education. Positive engagement with our customers is key, and it can often be the quickest way to resolving a breach of planning control. The National Planning Policy Framework is a key piece of planning legislation, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, and paragraph 60, as shown on the slide, gives Council clear directions of how breaches of planning control should be handled. Here at Huntingdonshire District Council, we have a corporate planning enforcement policy which embodies this paragraph and is applied to all areas of enforcement across the various teams that have a remit of this nature. This ensures a consistent approach from the Council. I would draw particular attention here to the wording which says that we should respond proportionately. We are a function that is quasi-judicial with good reason. We should look to take a measured approach and work with our customers to address all matters. Effectively, this paragraph recognises that as people and customers we can all make mistakes, and we are provided with a variety of tools to help resolve situations. With that said, formal action can be authorised where it is considered appropriate and in the public interest to do so. In practice, paragraph 60 of the NPPF means that all actions should be commensurate with the breach. Technical breaches may not be in the public interest to take forward formally. Breaches of planning control are just that, a breach, not an offence, unless we are dealing with matters that relate to listed buildings, trees, adverts, or non-compliance with enforcement notices. This approach can be quite difficult for some reporters to understand when they feel that action should be taken immediately. In order to help with understanding how we tackle our cases, we have recently updated our planning enforcement webpage to be clear on this approach and the reasons why, and what we can and cannot deal with under our legislation with the tools given to us from central government. It is important to note that planning enforcement is not simply punitive. It is there to prevent inappropriate development that would not get planning permission. A large percentage of the planning breaches that are reported to us have no action taken against them because there is no planning harm. This is a reason why on our reporting sheets we do ask our reporters to identify the harm that is being caused. This slide details the possible outcomes for our cases. Officers may find that details are not in breach if they benefit from rights under the Town and Country Planning General Permitted Development Order of 2015. It may be that the matter is a minor or technical breach, and it would not be in the public interest to pursue the matter further or formally. In such cases, works can remain unauthorised, and we will advise customers that when selling a property, this can still cause them issues. Parties may wish to submit a retrospective application for consideration, which can resolve the planning breach through the planning process, or amendments may be able to be made to bring the form of development back into permitted development allowances. If a breach is unlikely to be successful through a planning application and is causing significant demonstrable planning harm, we can then move to formal enforcement action. Due to the length of time the formal process can take, as detailed on this slide, we do try our best to negotiate resolutions where appropriate, as this can often lead to a speedier outcome for all parties. We will give developers standard timescales for certain ways to remedy a breach. This can include submitting a planning application and possible appeal, and if this fails, we can serve a notice, which, as detailed on the screen, takes 4 weeks to come into effect before the period for carrying out the required steps. This also has a right of appeal, and at present we are looking from anywhere between a year to 18 months for these to be concluded by the planning inspector. If the appeal is dismissed, the developer would still have time to carry out the works needed, as stated on the notice. This means that some cases can unfortunately take years to be resolved through where negotiation may have proved a quicker resolution. Recently, the team has focused on addressing a large proportion of older cases, and we have worked through these to help us work in a more efficient manner. We are blessed in Huntingdonshire to have a large number of beautiful listed buildings and protected trees within our district. They are heavily protected in law also. So if someone undertakes unauthorised works to these, should we just prosecute them? Reverting back to our corporate enforcement policy, the answer would be no. Again, similar to our assessments with breaches of planning control, officers must establish the facts on site and consider the best route of action to remedy matters. In some cases, this may well involve legal proceedings, but the test here is if it would be in the public interest to pursue this. As with so many things, education and information on these matters are key. We experience many homeowners who simply do not understand the undertaking they have when they purchase properties that contain listed buildings or protected trees. Whilst ignorance is no defence in court, part of our work is to help customers fully understand the responsibility and process they are obliged to follow. It is important to note that there are no time limitations when when dealing with listed buildings, that the local planning authority can address these at any time. Over the past 5 years, we have experienced some staff turnover within the team, with 3 officers unfortunately leaving us. Alongside our planning colleagues, there is also nationally a shortage of experienced planning enforcement officers. Having said this, we have managed to retain one of our officers who left the team into the wider planning service, and they have gone on to flourish as one of our planning officers and will shortly be joining the local plan team. We have also managed to attract another internal officer from the Huntingdonshire District Council to join our team, and she is currently undertaking some further external training to continue with our investment into our officers. During the pandemic, one of the key training providers for the area unfortunately ceased to trade. Nationally, there is a small supply of external training opportunities for planning enforcement, and with all councils competing for places, we found that we needed to look internally. We have managed to successfully fully train 6 officers in the past 5 years, and this training continues with monthly and wider service improvement training. It must also be noted that we are not always welcomed onto every site that we visit, and some customers can be very reluctant to engage with us. Officer safety is absolutely paramount, and we will work with other departments and agencies to ensure that we are both efficient and safe. Sometimes it can be difficult to organise access to a site when we are building a relationship with some customers, and sometimes we have to take small steps to ensure that we positively reach that end goal of resolution. To ensure that all staff are protected when undertaking duties, we also partake in the Council's Safeguarding Governance Board, where we collaborate with officers who have similar remits to ensure that all necessary precautions are undertaken and the safety of our staff and customers is upheld to the highest levels. Now I'd like to turn to our performance over the last 5 years, or as I prefer to describe it, our achievements and successes. As you can see on the slide, open cases have been reduced by over 1,000 cases, which has included the complete eradication of the backlog. Backlog cases were defined as those cases that were not assigned to officers who were no longer within the employ of Huntingdonshire District Council when I joined the team, and therefore were not being actively progressed forward. All cases held by the team at present, of which there are 365, are now actively being moved forward and addressed. This has involved some really dedicated work from the team, where we have buckled down and set ourselves some high targets of closing more cases than we receive every month, but it has paid off. The team have further investment through continued training, which has recently included some witness statement training just last week, and we have led on the review of standard planning conditions and have also successfully delivered training ourselves to members of the Development Management Committee, parishes and the National Trust. This graph demonstrates the performance of the team over the last 6.25 years. I'm sure that everyone will note the difficult year of 2020 when the world faced the pandemic, and this is clearly represented in the team's performance, and was also when site visits and interactions were incredibly difficult. Following on from this, however, you can see that the team has successfully managed to consistently close more cases than it received year on year, which allowed us to work through all of the older and unallocated cases that were previously held. New processes were implemented in the team to streamline how we work, and quarterly case reviews were introduced to ensure consistency between officers. All of this has resulted in moving the team forward to a much more positive position, and we hope to continue on this in future years. This concludes the presentation of this evening, and we can now move on to the questions part of this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. That was very helpful. And I want to pass on my personal thanks to the team who have certainly helped me in such times. Councillor Martin.
Thank you very much, Chair. I did line up a number of questions that I had beforehand reading through the report, but just listening to what was presented to us brings up a few anomalies. And it throws out the questions that I had. So I just think it's worth trying to clarify some of those first. So Ali, thank you very much for your presentation. In the presentation, you said that you currently have 350 open cases. In the report, it said as of 2019, you had 1,467 cases. Since 2019, you've had an extra 1,911, and in that time, you've only closed 2,168. That leaves us with nearly 1,200 open cases. So where have the extra 800 or so disappeared to?
So as of this evening, we had 365 cases on hand in the team. When I arrived in September 2019, we had 1,467 cases on hand. We are continually receiving reports each day, however, as business as usual. So those numbers do differ, and we have taken more in each day. So those numbers...
I completely accept that as of today it's 350, but that's a difference of 860 cases. So if you have a look under 4.2 of the report, it says in September 2019, reports demonstrated that the team had 1,467 cases open and on hand. Some of those cases were assigned. The next item, it says, since September 2019, we've received 1,911 new reports. during the same period of time, we've closed 2,168 cases. And that still leaves 1,210 cases, according to these numbers, still open, but you just told us that we've got only 350.
Sorry. So of the 2,168 cases that have been closed, some of those will have been of the 1,911 reports that have come in.
Yes, but still the numbers don't add up. If you add 1,467 to 1,911 and then take away 2,168, it leaves you with 1,210. So there should still.
If we can take that away and come back to you, because I think the devil's in the detail here. I actually understand the question you're asking from a simple kind of from a calculus perspective, but knowing how the team operate with how things come in, how they go out. So we may get an alleged breach, but we then may close it pretty soon after. Some may get closed later down the line. And some sites may have more than one report on them if there's been a variety of breaches. So we're quite happy to take that away.
No, I thank you, Chair, for that, and Clara for that. Obviously, the big thing that we wanted to talk today is about planning enforcement, and if the numbers of what we're being told on the night and what we're being told in the papers are as different as they appear to be, it isn't very useful, because my next point would have been, based on the 1,210 open cases, that works out to be 300 cases per member of staff that we've got. And according to the Planning Advisory Service, their recommendation is that you have only 150, at a maximum 150 cases, unless there's a well-argued business case. So my next question would have been, what is the well-argued business case that you've got to allow you to have more than 300 cases per caseworker? But the details that we've been given are completely different on the night to what's been received in the paper. So what else is there really to discuss? Because we're here to discuss the performance of the team.
Thank you, Chair, through you. I think what we need to focus on tonight is the numbers that are currently on hand, and obviously celebrate what Ali and the team have brought it down to. To your second point about the remaining numbers, well, the team are still working through that number in totality, and we'll arrive at decisions as to whether more cases can be closed. And I think then what we need to monitor is the in and out as we move forward. I fully accept the concerns that you raise. I equally will highlight too, knowing what Ali was carrying back then, there was a large amount of what I'm going to call known unknowns. So the lid has been lifted across everything. And notwithstanding that we may need to come back to you on the precision of the figures to date, what we are clear on is the figures that we do have on hand now. So we're very clear on what we have and what we're working on. We also then are clear on how we need to work going forward. We're not at the end of the journey here either. As I say, we focused first and foremost on making sure that every case was known, and then each officer will work through them. And I fully anticipate that number will continue to come down again. It also comes back to Alison's point within her presentation too about planning being a discretionary service, and how we work with you as councillors and how we work with parishes as well to focus on those key breaches of planning that are severe and that are in the public interest to enforce. Everything that Ali has at the moment in terms of caseload can be anything from the very minute to the very severe, and that's the next bit. We really need to separate out what are the areas that we need to focus our attention on, and what are the cases that perhaps we need to just close. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I appreciate the response, but it makes it very difficult for us to actually scrutinise the service without having the correct figures provided to us ahead of time. So I would have had significantly different questions if I'd known that the number was 350 rather than 1,210. So the next question that I have that's unrelated to some extent, is what it would have been useful also to have had in this document is some form of aged table of the current cases. So I note again in the report, whether it's right or not, I don't know, that there are 65 cases that are over 4 years old, but it doesn't tell you what the rest of the cases are. It would have been useful, as we do with aged debts, to have a table that sets out what is the age of the outstanding items of those 65 that are over 4 years old. I see reference to some of the cases potentially dating back to 2002. So it would have been useful to have known a little bit more information than just greater than 4 years old. So I think this has got to come back to us with some form of correction in the numbers that are provided to us. It'd be useful if we had that information as well, because again, it's very difficult. I recognise it takes around 12 months to complete a case if you look at the average nationally. So I recognise that a large number of those are going to sit within the 0 to 2 year time frame, but it's how many sits between 2 and 4 years, how many sits 4 to 6 years, and actually how many of them are greater than 10 years old, because what's been given to us in the presentation and in the paper doesn't tell us that.
Chair, if I could just come in at this point, totally take on board Councillor Martin's concerns. What I would also say is once the reports are published, if members do have concerns, then please highlight them as soon as possible. Although this is obviously I'm sorry? We didn't know the concerns until tonight. Well, you had the report before tonight, though, didn't you? Well, we didn't know the numbers because Ali just told us what the numbers were. Right, but you could have put that earlier. I'm not saying you had to, because this is a right forum to do it. All right, well, I take that on board. We'll come back.
Actually, okay.
Sorry, Chair, can I finish my comment, please?
Yes.
Thank you. We'll come back and we'll clarify. We'll look at aged cases, but I think Councillor Martin highlighted it himself that we don't actually have many members on the enforcement team. It is difficult to recruit and retain planning staff, so they are a finite team. I'm not saying that's in any way an excuse, but I think the report tonight has started the process. We'll take it on board and come back as necessary.
Mike.
Thank you, Chair. To hopefully alleviate some of the tension. If I can just remind members that scrutiny is not a one-hit effort here. You know, in terms of topics that are discussed by scrutiny, it is fairly common practice for members to request an item. A presentation and report is presented. Members will have a discussion. Members will then form working groups or task and finish groups, or indeed just ask simple questions. And simply officers and the portfolio holder will then come back and provide further detail, further colour, further clarity. It's an iterative process. It's not about proving things are wrong or incorrect. So, Councillor Martin, quite rightly, you've raised a question about the figures given based on what's presented tonight. You've heard it from officers and the portfolio holder. Happy to bring that back with a bit more colour and a bit more clarity. Equally, if there are bits you wanted to drill into, as you said, in terms of the age profile of the cases effectively, again, that's something that can be provided. So very much, again, scrutiny is a process. It's not about just looking at the report you've got here tonight, go away, that's the end of the process. The ability is for the report to come back with additional information to hopefully alleviate the concerns or queries, or indeed pick up any factors that are being brought forward. So if we can look at things in that context, I think it will help in terms of moving the conversation on, because the points you're raising, Councillor Martin, in terms of reference to the PAS guidance, perfectly acceptable and suitable line of inquiry. You know, ultimately, there are things then that can be taken away, the team can feed back and actually provide more clarity around them. So it's not an abortive piece of work for either party sat in this room. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think that we've identified that there's just a gap in the information. If Ali, you can get back to the committee on that, I think that will resolve a lot of the issues, and then we can, if there's still more gaps, we can take it forward. Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. I was particularly interested to hear about the feedback to the initial complainants at the end of the process, which all sounded great. Apart from the one interaction I've had with planning enforcement was I didn't get any feedback at the end, and really I think it's just a case of I'd be interested to know, what is your process for closing the case? At what point do you make that decision that the case is closed? Is that a decision that you take, or is it one that the planning officer takes based on their own?
So it will all depend on the merits of the case. So if there is not a breach of planning control, for example, then that case would look to be closed once that's been confirmed. There are cases where we may take those through our enforcement forum with Clara, who will make the decision as to whether it is expedient to pursue the matter formally, or whether we should issue a warning, for example, to the owner to advise that this will remain unauthorised. And as I sort of explained earlier, this can cause you problems when you're selling your property moving forward. So it varies upon how far we've got with the case and the points of expediency that we get to.
Sorry.
Thank you, Chair, through you. And thank you, Councillor Jennings, for the question. I think there's also a question too around when in time it happened. I think as Ali has taken through the process tonight, there have been periods, I think not limited to enforcement, but in planning more broadly, where we've been on a journey of improvement. So I think we're happy to take that away. And as Ali has set out the process, but always too feel free to kind of get in touch with us if things aren't running smoothly, but we'd like to think that we've moved on from that point now, and anybody who is raising queries with Ali and the team, or anybody in planning, that they are getting a response. Thank you. That probably was the when we were really going through change. Thank you.
Okay, Nick, Councillor Wells, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Wells is joining. A question about trees in particular. Where we have a situation where trees are under a TPO or in a conservation area and they are destroyed one way or another, what can be achieved in terms of getting a satisfactory, obviously trees being living beings, so to speak, replacing one tree with a fully mature replacement tree is obviously a very difficult thing to do, a very expensive thing to do, but what is an acceptable solution in terms of tree loss like that? Thank you.
I think again this is matters of fact and degree when we're looking at protected trees and the activities that have been undertaken. We would look at the harm that's been caused to the tree in question. We would consider the value that added to the local area, both visually and in terms of its scale and its prominence within the local area. We do have the opportunity to take prosecution proceedings. So it can be an educational piece. It can be replanting of a substantial sized tree that could also be TPO'd as well. We've had a case today that we've been out to that we're actually looking to move quite quickly on towards prosecution.
Sorry, Councillor Pitt.
Thank you, Chair. There's a slight risk of this turning into a ward question, but I'll try to couch it in more general terms. So I've come to attention, actually, a member of the public in my ward that in conservation area, changes to shopfront would require planning application. I would say there's been many years where that hasn't been adhered to, no doubt through lack of knowledge of the process, without wishing to confront your team with dozens of enforcement, sort of, what's the word, cases. What would be your preference to how that would be picked up, not obviously just in St Neots, but across the district for those sorts of enforcement issues?
I think we would always sort of invite, if there are reports of unauthorised works taking place, so if there are unauthorised shop fronts, then we're happy to investigate those. If there is a particular area, then I think there's an educational piece for us to play there also. So we would look to engage with local parishes to hopefully get that message out there, and perhaps we could do some visits along various areas if there's a particular stretch, for example, to provide some education where appropriate.
Clara.
Thank you, and through you, Chair, and just to build on what Ali has set out, I think it's also too that broader council position in looking at shop fronts, so they should be raised with us. As you know, we have a Market Towns Regeneration programme as well, which has been doing working with different shop owners on how they can improve their presence on the high street. So I think it's certainly worth raising with us. What I would also just put on the table is just tempering that Ali would be working with the economic development team and that, etc. Because coming back to that point about enforcement being proportionate, and as Ali pointed out there, ideally we would move into a phase of education and working with them and working with our economic development team as well to ideally support those business owners as well in making the right changes for the conservation area.
Thank you, Clara. Are there any other questions on this item? I want to thank you, Alison, for coming. I know it's your first time, and I found it very helpful, and I'm sure that we'll see you again. Mike.
Through yourself, Chair. So I think we've got a couple of bits that we'll pick up with the team collectively and bring back an addendum report to the panel in due course. What I would say to members of this committee is if there are any particular points, having reflected on what you've heard tonight, reflected on the report, please do let me, Clara, Alison or indeed Tom know, and we can make sure they're covered off appropriately within the follow-on report.
Thank you. Thank you. You can go now. Item 8, corporate plan refresh. Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm very happy to be presenting the corporate plan refresh tonight. As you know, the corporate plan includes actions that are to be delivered over multiple years. So in 24-25, which is just finished, we completed 21 corporate actions. This refresh includes 24 new actions plus 15 which are carried forward from 24-25, which means that this year's total actions number 67 as compared with 64 last year. So the plan remains ambitious and in many ways is more ambitious than ever before, which I think is reflected in the updates to the indicators we use to measure our performance against the corporate objectives, which we're giving you early sight of tonight. But I think that's going to come back formally, isn't it, Neil, to another meeting? So you have your chance to comment tonight, but if you want to consider those, we'll talk about them again, ONS, so we can finalise them. So they're all up for debate as usual. So 29 of the 32 operational performance indicators will remain, or we propose they will remain. 2 indicators have been merged into one, which I'll talk about in a second. One's been reworded, and 4 additional indicators are proposed. The merging of 2 into 1 relates to one leisure, active lifestyles and sport development activity, which we're basically doing that for the purpose of clarity and never really understood the difference between those 2 measures. I think combining them into a single measure will help. The 4 new indicators are the cumulative footfall in the market towns, which is going to be reported on a monthly basis. I think that's really important considering the investment we're making in all of the market towns, but also for obviously our residents and the economic well-being of the district. The economic development team are going to log the total number of business engagements that they make. We're going to have a customer satisfaction score for the contact centre, and we're also in employment going to start measuring the length of service in years, which is an alternative measure of churn. It's good to have a very experienced team, but also we need to be thinking about sustainability and bringing new people through. One replacement indicator in my portfolio area is we're changing the number of enforcement actions taken on fly tips, which is fines and court summons, and replacing that with sanctions against environmental crimes and antisocial behaviour. The reason for that is that we want to better reflect the work that team undertakes. For those of us on licensing protection, or those of us in Ramsey and St Neots, that team have been doing a fantastic job recently with some public spaces protection orders, solving some really big problems. And I think it's only fair that we reflect their work because they're split across many different activities, and measuring one aspect of that work I think is rather unfair for them and doesn't really show the full value they provide to Huntingdonshire. So in total, we had 32 KPIs last year. We will have 35 this year. We've increased 5 of the targets, some of them quite substantially, I think. 2 have decreased, I think, which is up for negotiation, but I'm happy to have your feedback either tonight in writing or at next time we brought this to corporate governance. We're going to bring all the, we're going to close out last year's performance next month, is it? Or in June? in June. So you'll have a chance to comment on that again then. So that's what I've got. Do you want to add anything to that, Mr. Sloper, or not?
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. I'd just like to remind the panel that the corporate plan is there as the council's response to delivering the outcomes that we want for Huntingdonshire. So it takes those priorities from Huntingdonshire Futures and takes them into action. The priorities and the objectives have remained the same year on year. So if you remember last year, there were a couple of tweaks, but now they remain the same. And it's just to remind you that the actions reflect specific actions to those, but actually they do inform the work of the whole of the council, and you'll see them referenced in the reports that come forward for all decision making coming forward. So they haven't changed. Yes, for the first time, we've brought forward the proposed indicators really early with the corporate plan. That's to promote that debate and that early engagement. So I hope that that is helpful. And also Appendix 2 and 3 are new in presenting the corporate plan so that we're showing the evolution of those actions in terms of which ones have been completed, which ones are being carried forward, and then also where the proposed actions for the new year ahead, where they're coming from, so that you can just see that quite clearly, again, to promote that level of scrutiny and engagement. So yes, open to any comments.
Thank you, Neil. And yes, I did notice the appendices and I actually found it quite helpful to see the completed documents. Open for questions. Councillor Pitt.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks. Good to see this report coming back. A very small point, but on getting to know Huntingdonshire, some really nicely laid out stats on those pages. I was slightly thrown by population stats that add up to 90%, and I think they're all of adult population. But just to pick up that section, I think it does mention the sources at the end of that part, but maybe needs a little bit more contextualisation prior to final version of the publication. There's a standard point I want to make. So of the 4 new indicators, I think 3 of them are excellent and really delighted to see those. So I'll gloss over those really. I think so. The one on total number of business engagements by the economic development team, I think that's a really interesting thing to measure. When I first read it, I kind of imagined face-to-face meetings and counting the number of those, and I started to think, well, actually, like just trying to increase the number is a bit of a clumsy proxy for the impact that we're looking from that team. And so actually, could there be a more meaningful way of measuring that impact? And I would guess it would be something like, a post, like a little out of 1 to 5, how useful has that meeting been, or something like that, just to ensure, because we've all been to meetings in our day-to-day lives where you think, well, that could have been an email or whatever it might be. So just to make sure that the value is being recognised by the people having those meetings. As I read further through the report, I see actually that's within that performance indicator. We're talking also about LinkedIn growth, newsletter sign-ups, and other sort of stats that actually is quite a lot grouped in there. And I wonder, all of those are good, but I wonder whether grouping them all together really reveals as much meaningful information as just to really focusing in on those, if it is face-to-face meetings that are included in that performance indicator. That's the thing that I'd be really interested in seeing. So there's a few kind of suggestions within that rather than a specific one. But yeah, I think kind of trying to have, because really what we're looking at is what is the economic benefit of that team, and we're trying to find a proxy for it. I think just number of interactions feels a little bit loose. Thank you very much.
So you're suggesting that they actually come up with some metrics or methodology rather than just the numbers. Neil.
Exactly that. So I'll leave it with the team to kind of, dwell on that observation. Yeah.
So respect to Eustace. I hope you're not referring to district council meetings, all of which are incredibly productive and useless. So I think it's a good point. I've worked in business development before, not economic development, but measuring the quality of engagements is important. It's a very difficult thing to do objectively, but I think certainly it's a good suggestion. With respect to the detail, there's always a balance between providing a nice number that you can interpret on a graph and having all the detail. I think Councillor Martin and I would rather go for all the detail and standard deviations and things. But I think we can feedback back to the team, Mr. Sloper, and see if they've got any suggestions. It has to go through them, I think.
Yeah, I think obviously the issue there is you could just use thematic views, can't you, on marketing or something of those and develop those. Neil, are there any other? Councillor Martin.
Thank you very much, Chair. Well, first off, thank you very much for the report. I'm glad to see this come earlier than we would usually see it. I think it gives us an opportunity to have that discussion as we've been asking for a number of years since the joint administration. So I'm glad to see it come to us earlier rather than later, and we can have those discussions. So thank you very much for doing that. Initially, I'd like to pick up on a couple of the corporate actions, which I made some notes on. So if it's all right, Chair, if I take them one at a time, I've got a few to raise. So the first one is point 29. So produce sustainable housing guidance for developers that encourages sustainable construction methods and new homes to be of high environmental standards. Now, I wonder whether we could adjust this one slightly so that we're not just looking from an environmental standpoint, but we're also looking at a future standpoint as well. So there's been a lot of work that's been done by the likes of Age UK that have said that if we can build homes at the beginning that are built for wheelchair users, for people with less mobility, etc., we're going to be in a better place in 50 years' time when my generation gets a bit older and we're able to continue to live in the homes that we've lived in for our whole lives rather than having to move into other accommodation which may not suit our lifestyles. And then I'll just ask one more and then I'll pass over to them. The second one is point 39. So influencing delivery of infrastructure such as East West Rail, A428, A141, and the strategic outline business cases and future transport strategies. I wonder whether this is an opportunity for us to also include Ackring-Wilds train station. I think that would be a huge economic growth to our area. I know that there's a lot of work going on at the moment with the developer and the district council and the wider networks. I wonder if that's something that we could, and I'm happy to recommend that we include East West, the Ackring-Wilds train station in that point, because I think it's something that we as a council should be getting behind. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. So those are both excellent points, though. Councillor Martin's generation, I'm substantially closer towards needing one of the houses than he does, so it's more urgent. But I think it's really important. One of the things we don't do very well on is disability facilities grant, which is trying to close a door after the horse is bolted. If we could get these things up front. I remember County Council Hustings 4 years ago. I was asked a difficult question, and what are you going to do about this? I had no answer. So this is probably one of the better answers I've heard, and so. We'll have to take it back to the team as usual, but I think it's a good suggestion because I think that's, the climate emergency is important, but as something that affects lots of residents, I think that's a really key one. And I'd I'd agree with you personally on Alconbury-Weald railway station. I think most of the people in joint administration would too, and as an ambition for influencing that as one of the things we can influence as a council, I think definitely we'd be in favour of that. Again, we'll take it back to the team, but I think it's an excellent suggestion and one which would have possibly the most significant effect on Huntingdonshire. So thank you for those suggestions. I agree with both of them.
Thank you. Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Ferguson, for bringing the proposed KPI changes earlier than usual. It's much appreciated. It won't surprise you to know I have some comments on those proposals. The first one, the merger of the two active lifestyles targets. In the last quarter's report, I think they were on track to get 43,000 and 12,600 together for this year, which would come to 55,600. So I'd be disappointed to see that our proposed target was less than the number that we're actually on outturn to achieve this year. So if that's something you might want to take away and have a look at. On the new performance indicator number 4, where the target that you are suggesting, it says there that previous performance indicates that no targets below 28 weeks have been met in the last 3 years. But the target would have been your new proposed target would have been met every single month this year, apart from August. So I think it's to move from 22 to 30, given that that 28 benchmark has been made. So I think that would just be one to have a look at. Did you want to?
So certainly with the first one, I don't think I'd have to go back and work out what the context was of any potential lowering of targets. But I don't think, if we're achieving good performance, I don't think we want to reduce the targets at all. So I take that point and we'll take that back. On the DFGs one, I think it's also a good point. I'm very reluctant to set a more lenient target because I think it's the big thing that keeps coming back. Having said that, having failed for 3 years, it has to be a reasonable target, but the target still has to be reasonable. And I don't want to set a target that diminishes the importance of this issue as well. So again, we'll take those back and we'll reconsider them. Those are both excellent points. Thank you.
If I could also just add, Councillor Jennings, you raised an important point. We haven't done the quarter four yet because it closed on Monday. So some of the outturns will affect. We've pre-identified, I think it's 5 indicators there that we know we want to take that into account. But obviously we will do that review as well as we bring them back just to make sure that we take that into account. So thank you for raising it and, making sure we do.
Did you have another? Okay.
Thank you, Chair. The next one was number 27, which was about the percentage of calls to the contact centre. And it says that the percentage of calls answered has not dipped below 86%. But the proposal is to only go to 85. So I would have thought that you perhaps have had a slightly more challenging target than some. And on 28, I think there's just a typo there, where you're looking at it says current target 300 seconds and proposed target 600 seconds, whereas actually I think that's the tolerance level of the current, and then where it says the current tolerance would be the new proposed target. So I think that just needs amending.
So in terms of 27, this is my portfolio, so I can speak to this. I mean, so this target has come from the team, and it's one which I reluctantly accepted for the opposite reason, because again, I think they want to push performance, which I think is admirable. But the proposed target or the current performance target of 80% or 85% is far in excess of almost any other commercial or public body. And I think that there's a danger where we just chase performance for performance sake. My view is I want them to provide, and they do, a very holistic service. So trying to push people to close calls more quickly so you can meet your targets can be counterproductive, because we're frontline responders. We see inside people's lives, and having sat with a team and listened to the way they investigate all people's circumstances, check out which benefits they might be able to, doing lots of the work that'd be done by the DWP, I'm very nervous about pushing them into a situation where, they're going to be closing calls early. So I think that, personally, I think this is a good target. If it had been my choice, I probably would have kept it where it is. So I'd be reluctant to increase it further, but I think it's a helpful suggestion. Thank you. Well, and we can of course discuss it further.
Thank you. Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Chair. I have noticed this evening that I seem to have missed not having the KPI details in my pack, but I would like to ask the councillor whether or not he is still in agreement with 12.1 on the paper this evening, which refers to looking at every holistically looking at everything through a green lens and embedding climate and green agenda through everything the council does.
So it's not a question of whether I agree with it or not.
No,
I mean,
no,
it's a corporate objective of the council. I do think it's important. I also design diesel engines for a living, so you might look at that. But I think it's really important. I think that's what this administration has done. And it's what we continue to do. And I think sometimes as the, politically in the world, the focus is turning away from that. And because it's always going to be an issue, getting towards net zero came up in last council meeting, didn't it? Is an incredibly challenging target, especially considered we've achieved a lot, but we've done all the low hanging fruits. And so the next stages are the really difficult ones. So I think, personally, as not one of the younger members as a councillor, but with a young family, I do think it's important that we do that. And I think most of our residents would support that.
Thank you for clarifying that. I'm obviously asking the question in light of a response that I had earlier in this to another item in this meeting. I'm a little bit now. As I say, I've got some papers. It seems as though they're missing from here, but I did notice that being one of the those over 65s that are growing rapidly in the district, and obviously we've now got homes which have a declining number of people per household. There doesn't seem to me to be a particular strategy geared to creating homes that would attract people to move out of a larger home that they no longer need, or to one of more appropriate size. And I just wondered how these statistics are being used and brought together, in order to build our community. I mean, if we've got more older people, then we need to surely ensure that those homes that could house a family, that they're available by providing something for those older people. And whenever I see planning applications, they're all for flats and for first-time buyers, or small homes for first-time buyers. And it would make much more sense, I think, to sort of try and address that in a policy. But I'm not aware of one that the council has. Do we have one?
And not that I'm aware of is the answer.
I think actually that's picked up with planning. Did you? Yes, it's part of the planning process. However, I'll pass it to.
Thank you, Chairman. You've clearly been. There are policies within the local plan that look to ensure we provide a balanced mix of housing to meet all needs across those types. It is a policy framework. And it just kind of linked back to Councillor Martin's point earlier that, in national policy, there is policy and there is guidance. We don't have a fixed, thou must build particular units for over 65s, because that's not possible within the planning framework that we've got. So we do have the policies in the current local plan. We will be looking to adjust those policies as we move forward with our new local plan. It will be informed by the evidence and the data that we're doing as part of that, to ensure that as all development comes forward over the plan period, it tries to meet as much of that market need as possible.
Thank you, Mike. I'm glad I was awake at those meetings. Councillor Steve Corney, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I was sort of quickly trying to find something there to about basically it's building regs when it comes down to we build houses and the whether they're wheelchair accessible and so on, and that's ever changing. That's a separate thing. But I just wanted to pick up on what you said about the work that's gone on for the public space protection orders. I think sadly it's I'm going to be interested to see how that's going to work out, because I'm looking at the scoring. It sort of tends to. I'm not sure how that's going to work. How we score that. So that'd be interesting to see how that plays out. But I think we can do some great work as has happened in Ramsey. But then I think once it's in place, what you get then afterwards, sadly, is out of our control and it drops off a cliff. And when we've got people sort of going against these orders, and you call the police or whatever, and very little happens then, which is which is a shame because a lot of good work gone in the first place. But again, that's kind of out of our control. We can try and influence, but I don't know how that's going to. But coming back to how the score is, we're interested to see how that's scored. So thank you.
I mean, it's a good point. Is with respect to the PSPOs, we have them in place in St Neots and Ramsey because the police supported us and said they had the resources to support them. As the chair will know, we tried to put something similar in place in St Ives, and the police didn't have the resources to support it, so we couldn't do it. But having spent time with that team, whose job goes around involves sticking anti-dog fouling stickers on bins. Every time anybody reports an abandoned car, they have to deal with those things. Antisocial behaviour, and really, really, really actively chasing down fly tipping and investigating fly tipping. It's not just a question of cleaning it up. So they do lots of those different things. And I think it's probably a case where we need, I know they also record quite detailed stats as well because they kindly send them to me. So I think it's worth recording all the different types of interventions just so that you could be aware of all the work they do. I must admit, I'd been in this role for about a year before I really understood that we had any role to play in acting against antisocial behaviour. So I think the more we can advertise that, I think it's better for that team and demonstrates the excellent work they can do. So I'm very happy to include a breakdown of all the different type of actions because, it helps, bring them recognition and also demonstrated what we achieved with a very limited resource.
Thanks.
Just simply say, please don't think that was being a negative comment that I made, but counting, and I know firsthand, I've commented before about fly tipping and what have you. That's going to be an easy one to score, isn't it? Because it's a tangible thing there, isn't it? Whereas the antisocial behaviour it's a difficult one to to score. So I'm just interested to see how that comes out as it goes along. Thank you.
So just to add to that, I mean, I took it as a positive comment, but the reason we have these measures in place in the first place is because that team, reported these things to me informally, didn't think they were getting recognition, and brought forward the fly tipping one as kind of the first iteration, and had decided to include it this way as well. So definitely. In whatever way we can, measuring their performance, I think, is a great thing and something that they would be happy with, as well as all the residents who benefit from their interventions.
Quite, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few minor comments. I think number 28, I think there's a wording issue on that one, as Councillor Jennings has pointed out. I think it's a less difficult target, not a more difficult target. The number has gone up, but the target is easier to achieve. I was also glad to see that we have in KPI 34 recognised that LGR may affect some of our KPRs, and on that one we have suggested changing the KPI to allow for LGR. Are there any others we should be doing that to, is my question really. It's a broad question. And my third point is about houses for life. Absolutely and totally agree. As you know, I'm in a wheelchair. We are not building houses for life. We are building houses that are totally inappropriate for ageing people.
So I think the LGR risks and the impacts it's going to have are obviously significant, but it's really much too early to tell, isn't it? And I think from our point of view, as much as possible, we've always been about business as usual, about 80% of what we do, 80% of what we do. And so I think it's important that whatever happens, this council, we keep on serving residents right to the very end. And so we can hand over whatever we have to the next authority to take on our legacy. So, if it comes up, we review these. That all targets are going to be affected by things that happen in the year. So, and we bring these back every quarter. And if we miss things for that reason, then I'll be turning up and trying to use that as an excuse, I'm sure. But I think it's important. I mean, we have to recognise that the changing political climate or local government climate is going to affect these things. But I don't think we should build it in at this stage because we don't have enough information to.
Neil.
just to confirm, we'll integrate that within the quarterly report. So if there is something, for example, if there's a corporate plan action that seems nonsensical to do because some decisions have been made, then we would need to bring that back to scrutiny to make you aware of that and the rationale. So a bit like Appendix 2 and 3, we would prepare that documentation and bring that to you so that there's clarity and transparency around that decision. And then that way members can discuss that implication as well.
Thank you for that. Councillor Pitt.
Thank you. Just very quickly, I think there's been quite a few really constructive observations and suggestions made that have been, warmly received by the portfolio holder, which is lovely. I think, and obviously reference to getting this in good time. I know how quickly weeks and months, disappear, and I can see that it's going to come to cabinet in 2 weeks and then to full council a month later. It'd be really great just to kind of have a reassurance that there is time to process some of these suggestions and consider changes before it comes as a policy for adoption.
Sorry, can I just clarify? Do you mean the targets, the recommendations on the targets and the changes?
Yeah, so I think some of them are targets of various comments that have been made this evening.
Subject to the teams themselves agreeing, because there might be factors we don't understand. I'm happy we'll consider them all carefully and let you know what we decide. So, I think that's important. I think I remember the last time that we were discussing the targets was on the day that general election was announced, which is on May the 31st, and I wasn't paying as much attention last year because Rishi Sunak dropped a bombshell on us. So it's good to be doing this early, and we'll do whatever. Like it's much better to do this up front than to sit for a whole year of quarterly reports being told we've set too easy targets. So I've always wanted to have targets which act as an amber warning light on your dashboard and can tell us where we're going wrong. So I think all of the suggestions tonight have been sensible, and we'll try to include as many as possible. And we can do that in writing, if you like, offline before those meetings.
That would be helpful. So we actually got an update on, the recommendations and where we are, because obviously we've picked that up before. Councillor Martin.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just two final points from me. First one is on affordable housing. I know I raised this one last year, and I'm very happy to see that we are now having a target that matches the assessments we've made, and we've worked out what our area needs, and now our targets are what's been assessed as what our need is for Huntingdonshire, recognising that we may not necessarily meet it first year. It may take a bit of time to get to that stage. I'm sure with the new MPPF and new planning structure, we will almost definitely exceed that target. But at least we now know what is the needs assessment that has been made, and that is a target that we're trying to achieve. So I'm really grateful that we've been able to make that change. The second one touches on a point that Councillor Pitt raised at the start around economic development. The team does a huge amount of work, and I think a lot of the time it goes unrecognised. Rebecca Tomlin and her team do some fantastic work, and I see it from them going to UK Reef, or whether it's talking to developers or other potential investors in Huntingdonshire. And my biggest concern with this KPI, and I do think we should be measuring what they're doing because they're doing some fantastic work, is that we're going to be pushing them more towards just having a meeting rather than getting something over the line, getting the achievement at the end of it. And I wonder whether we keep the target as it is, but maybe within the side notes, we can include some successes that her and her team have had over that quarterly period, whether it be that they've managed to capitalise on UK Reef, and they've managed to have 3 meetings with a developer that's looking to bring money into the area, etc., etc. But I think it's great that we're now recognising through this process the incredible work that they're doing, because it really is fantastic for Huntingdonshire.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Okay, well, thank you for that. So we'll move on to item 9. I think it's the last item, Corporate Peer Challenge. Thank you, Neil. Thank you.
Good evening. I feel like I've had the warm-up act before me, and I'm in on the last stretch. you have before you tonight the Corporate Peer Challenge Actions Update. I'd remind you that we had the Peer Challenge. It came and it was a very welcome experience because it brought a lot of opportunity for us to reflect on what we were doing well, what we wanted to improve upon, and opportunities to do some new things. What you have before you tonight is the update on where we are with those actions. I would remind you that it's never a finished process. So what you've got tonight is the actions which fall out directly from that Corporate Peer Challenge, but then obviously they themselves then generate a whole new raft of actions that are actually embedded in our business as usual, and some of those things fall through into the corporate plan. So I certainly don't want you to get the impression that anything that we say is completed means that that's it and we're never going to look at it and never going to consider it again. It means that bit of a process we have come to a conclusion on. But I'm going to ask Mr. Sloper, is there anything else that you'd like to particularly draw people's attention to?
Thank you. I think the important thing to reiterate is that this is part of the government's improvement and assurance framework, which is why we've done the peer review, that actually we want the value of those areas where we could do better in relation to experiences of other peers. So therefore, it's not necessarily a judgment on the whole of the council and all of its services, but it does identify areas where we can focus our attention and do more effort. So Appendix 1 gives you sort of like the highlights, if you like, a presentation. And then Appendix 2 is kind of the more detailed update, which is the tracker that we use internally, that we update every quarter. And it's fair to say that, yes, there are some items there that are green, but they're not marked as complete. It just means that there are actions underway and that we're comfortable with that progress. And then, like any learning council, we've identified some of those areas where we're not quite as happy with the progress that we're making at the moment. And those are the ones that we've scored as amber, and that's where there's more attention and more effort currently focused at the moment to bring them, back online to make them green. And that will change and evolve as per time, but it's important that we present that to you openly to Scrutiny so that you're able to see that and also ask questions. So with that, I guess we're open to questions.
Open to the floor. Councillor Martin.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for the update. I'm glad we're finally receiving this update after a while. So I'm glad to see it in front of us. And my first initial thoughts reading through it, and this report was obviously given to us before the peer review team came back in to review the progress. And one of the feedbacks that I gave is that there's a lot of green here, and a lot of the green I don't think is necessarily warranted, should I say. I think we should have been a bit more sceptical with the progress that we've made. I've just pulled out 5 of the recommendations, Chair, if I can go through them with a couple of points to raise. So I'll go in order. I'll skip number 4 and I'll come back to it once I've done the others. So recommendation number 2, strengthening internal approach to engagement. Now, what this slide rates, so I'm looking at the presentation slides rather than the detailed reports. It says about the community health and wealth building strategy. In the report or in the presentation, it says that you did some workshops in August and September. But it's my understanding that, we only decided the funding for this strategy in December 25. So therefore, there was money spent on this project before it was ever given permission by this council to spend that money, which, as far as I'm concerned, isn't very good governance, which leads on to recommendation 6, which talks about the governance of the council. Now, you just have to look at the corporate governance meeting of, was it last week or the week before? And we have to just look at the internal and external audit reports, especially the external audit report, isn't very favourable. So I don't see how that one can be green. So we may be moving to strengthen our governance, our compliance and our risk, but our governance, compliance and risk isn't there at the moment. So again, that one being a green, I don't see how we can justify that. Recommendation number 3, apologies to jump up again. The communication strategy, it says that we've got a communication strategy in place. It's gone to Cabinet. We're still waiting to see it here. I know we discussed it at the start of the meeting and it will be coming to us. That's great. The other part of that presentation slide, it says we've got 3 campaigns. Okay, what are the 3 campaigns? Nobody seems to, we don't know. No one has told us what those 3 campaigns are. So again, how can we realistically judge where we're at without knowing that information when it's in the report? And before I touch on recommendation 4, the final one is recommendation 8. Talking about scrutiny and transformation. As I mentioned at the start, again, where's the information on where we currently are on transformation? I know we've got a red and an amber on that, but it's difficult for us to really judge where we are and where we've got to get to if we don't have a baseline. So it'd be useful if this panel, as Mike and I will have a discussion offline to work out how we can best bring that to this panel. How can we realistically work out where we've got to get to and therefore where we are today without knowing the baseline of where we were in when this report was first put together? And then just jumping back up to recommendation 4 in regards to planning services. The first part of the presentation, it says the planning service peer review is complete with recommendations and action plan for 2025-26. The draft report was reviewed, feedback provided, and an action plan integrated into service planning for 2025-26, and it's marked complete. Now, looking around this table, has anyone received the peer review? No? How many months have we been asking for it? Several. So how can we say that this is complete, that we've had a chance to receive the draft report, provide feedback, create an action plan, and then integrate it into a service plan if it hasn't been seen in the democratic process? I don't see how we can be saying that that is, one, acceptable from a governance point of view, because it should be coming to our panel as soon as possible, not allowing for all this work to happen beforehand. That is what happened with this report when it came to us. But how can we say that it's been completed if it hasn't gone through the democratic cycle? It just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So I welcome feedback, especially on recommendation 4.
So I'd remind you that these aren't key performance indicators in a traditional sense. So these are actions that have been underway, and you've already heard that green means that they're on track. If they're completed, it means that piece has been done, but then there's secondary processes. The things that you want to see here, obviously you're working with officers to ask for those things to come forward. So you have a scrutiny plan, and the things you've asked for on that scrutiny plan will then come forward through that process. The peer review, the planning peer review, we've had a delay, and I'm going to look to Mike in a moment to speak to that. We've had a delay in that coming through. I believe it's coming back through, and you'll get that back through here. But Mike, do you want to pick that up specifically?
Through yourself, Chair, if I can just clarify that particular point was addressed at full council. The proper process for the planning peer review is ultimately to Development Management Committee rather than scrutiny, because effectively the planning committee is delegated that function from full council. So that is the appropriate process rather than scrutiny. And as per the report that was fed back last week, I believe the relevant portfolio holder and shadow portfolio holder, I think, are meeting this week to actually discuss it before it goes into the actual arena. That said, in terms of the action that's there, the peer review was the original request from the CPC process to have a peer review of planning. That's been done. And as part of the service planning, an action has been built in to say, respond to and develop an action plan that is in response to the peer review. So I pick your point up about the confusing nature of the language, and I think we could have sharpened that up, but hopefully that provides the clarification.
Thank you, Chair. No, I appreciate that, and I completely recognise that this goes through DMC. But the fact that we've managed to get to an action plan before it coming through the democratic process, whichever process that is, whether that's through that's through this committee, whether that's through DMC, whether it's through full council, cabinet, whatever, to say that this action is complete, despite it not coming through the democratic process in any way, shape or form, despite it being asked for several months. So I know it was asked for at the last full council meeting, it was also asked for at the February full council meeting, it was also asked for an update in the December full council meeting. So this has been asked for some time, both online and offline, and it hasn't come to us. So to say that this is complete, I think is completely wrong.
Thank you. Well, I note your comments and we will take that away, but don't forget that some of that timeline, we didn't in fact have a report at the point at which you were asking. So, but I'll take that point away. What I do want to say to you is, obviously we've had the peers back in. I do note your comments, and the peers in fact replayed those back to us when they came to the second feedback session. The peers were also sceptical about the greens, reds and ambers, and they raised the fact that you'd raised it with them. Interestingly, their final feedback, and obviously we've got to have a final report back, was that actually they were assured that having gone away and scrutinised, because they equally were concerned that we might have been a bit too liberal with the green, that actually they were assured that we weren't. Does that mean that it's perfect? No. There clearly are things that you've highlighted, and we will take those away. We want to be as open and transparent about that. That's why we've had the peer review in. That's why you've all participated in it. That's why we've engaged with all of our officer corps, because actually that's how we learn. Certainly from this, one of the learnings is the desire for people to be far more engaged in what comes from the peer review process. I think that's incredibly positive. The fact that you are so keen to bring things back through the process, I think is fantastic. That's the whole reason we engaged with the peer review in the first place was because we didn't have a history of doing that kind of practice. That's why, since this administration's been in place, we've had 3 peer reviews, and it won't be the last. So I'm really pleased you're interested, really want to make sure that you have access and that transparency, because actually it's really important as an organisation we continue to look at opportunities to review, refine and move forward. So we'll take that back to the teams and we'll think about how we bring some of that information back before you, and we'll just have to work through in terms of which bits of our governance system see which aspects, but certainly that openness and transparency, there is a real desire to do that, so we'll take that on board.
Councillor Catmull.
Thank you very much, Chair. Recommendation 6. My eyesight is not that. No. Yeah. It says strengthen our governance, compliance and risk. And I can see lines of action that deal with the first 2 of those 3, governance and compliance, but I don't see a line of action that deals with risk. You might suspect I would raise that, given that's what I do as a profession.
So thank you very much, Councillor Catmull. Obviously, this is not all of the activity which goes on elsewhere. So a lot of that will be picked up through the corporate governance work, which is ongoing. So we take risk very seriously. We know that there is a huge amount of work we still want to do around risk. That's already come through the corporate governance peer reviews that we've had so far, but actually that will be picked up there through that mechanism and it'll come back through corporate governance. But I note your point that actually perhaps it's not as clear in this report and to the forefront as perhaps you would expect.
Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Conboy, we've got, I'm looking at CPC 009 on here. Now, I'm afraid it's absolutely, it's about 4 point, I think, on this, so I'm really straining. But in light of, and I appreciate that you've been sitting there listening to us all evening, so I'm not going to repeat what I've already repeated to 2 people, but 009 says the recommendation is to review the planning service to ensure that within the planning policy framework the council's priorities are being delivered, and then it specifically says climate and environment. Now, do you agree with me that protecting the planning, permanently protecting the planning status as green open space of probably the district's most important floodplain of 50 acres approaching St Neots. Is that not something that should be done as the Flood Resilience Authority and also the Planning Authority? And should that not be included in the local plan, as is suggested by the NPPF and the Localism Act, which was a very good piece of legislation introduced by the Liberal Democrats?
Through you, Chair, if I may. I'm not sure whether that's a compliment or not, Councillor Chapman, but I'll take it. Obviously, you've had quite a detailed response tonight. Can I just say to you on a personal level, having been involved in God Manchester's neighbourhood plan, where we did in fact have designated local green spaces, I would advocate strongly to do it. It's not nearly as difficult as you might think, and actually it's really, really worth having. You've had an answer from our planning team tonight about that particular piece of floodplain, and so we've got a way to work forward with that. But I hear your angst, and I know how important it is to the people in St Neots that we protect them. And I feel that angst because I've got the country's largest water meadow in God Manchester. So actually having that resilience and that space to store surplus water as and when it arrives, I understand the importance of that. So we'll take that away because obviously our planning team have offered to come and work with you directly.
Chair, this will continue.
I don't doubt it. Councillor Pitt.
Thank you, Chair. There's a slight overlap with a couple of Councillor Martin's comments, and actually it was somewhat picked up by Councillor Conway in her introductory speech. But on recommendation 2, so community health and wellbeing co-design. So just to pick up on Councillor Martin's point about the order of events, I just want to reassure Councillor Martin and anyone else that there was principles that were approved or went through ONS, I think in June or July, and then work was ongoing from that point, engaging with the public. So it was the fund that was approved in December, but work had to build up to that point. So I think the governance was in line from my point of view. The point I wanted to make actually was about the word completed. And I know Councillor Conboy said at the beginning, if you see the word completed, it doesn't necessarily mean it's finished. And I'm really glad to hear that, because I think co-design isn't about getting people in the room once. I think there's and in fact, at the meeting that I attend that's referenced here, there was an open invitation and even a promise to say this is not a one-off opportunity to have an input into the process. And actually, the residents that turned up to that event were really enthusiastic about coming back and being part of an ongoing discussion. Just referencing back to the previous agenda item, we talked about delivering the community health and wealth strategy and go live with funding mechanisms to invest in initiatives identified and chosen by our communities. So I'm just looking for a reassurance that that is something that the administration is absolutely committed to that conversation. So it's really easy to what am I saying? To say it's really hard to bring members of the public in and give them a really meaningful voice. It's hard to do it, but it's really important because that's actually what makes really good quality policy. And I welcome your support for that.
If I may, Chair, thank you. As the former portfolio holder, thank you for the clarity. I'm hoping that helps. Councillor Martin, I can assure you we are completely committed to that. And you're right, it's not an easy process to do in a really meaningful way, in a way that also adds value. But you do also remind us, the real challenge with the peer review is it gives us a set of actions. And there is an onus on us to then say, well, have we taken those actions seriously and are we delivering against those actions? The real challenge about presenting a report back is that actually nothing is ever finished. Everything always rolls forward. But we have to be able to say that we've taken seriously and we've taken on board those actions, we've done some work on them, and then it's handed off into a different project plan, or it's handed over into our business as usual. Or in fact, that piece of work is completed, as in we will never go back to it. So I think there's something I will take away from this in terms of maybe the word completed is unhelpful in this context. Maybe it needs to say that phase is finished or that particular commitment is closed, rather than we've finished all the work we will ever do on a particular topic. Because as I say, nothing is ever finished or completed and completely signed off. all of these then feed back into our business as usual, as well as specific strategic commitments and corporate plan commitments. So I think that's something we'll think about. And maybe actually the traffic light of red, amber, green is also unhelpful, because we tend to think of that and we've just had a report on key performance indicators where we use red, amber, green. So maybe we need to have a think about how we bring that information back in a way that is genuinely meaningful and useful to you, so that you can genuinely scrutinise it and engage, but equally somehow doesn't misrepresent the activity that's happened. So I think we'll take that away and have a bit of a think. I'm not sure that I know the solution for it, but we've got a fantastic officer team who do this day in, day out. So I think we'll have a think about how we bring that back. And then I'd really welcome some offline feedback from all of you if you think there are different ways that would be more meaningful in terms of what we bring back to you, so that you can continue to engage with us on it. Thank you.
Thank you for the clarification. I mean, I'm fairly clear on red, amber, green. I mean, effectively, green is on track. It's not completed until it goes to grey or something. That's sort of standard project management process. So I think possibly the word completed is a misnomer, and I just think it adds confusion. Councillor Martin.
Yeah, on that point, Chair, what I personally would find useful is maybe we use a red, amber, green 1, 2, 3 system. So the 1, 2, 3 signifies we haven't started yet, we're in the process, we've finished. And then the red, amber, green is, well, this is what we were expecting to be at this stage. We weren't expecting, we were a bit behind. And then red is, we are massively behind. I think some form of looking at both where we are in the process and whether it's where we were expecting to be in the process would be a useful way of maybe not necessarily with KPIs, but particularly in this sort of format. So I think would have been very useful. Thank you, Chair.
Are there any other questions? Well, thank you. At that point, I want to thank all the officers and yourself, Sarah, for your contributions tonight, and I call the meeting to a close. Thank you, everyone, for the time and the questions. Thank you.